In a small town on the outskirts of the city, there was an old antique shop named Old Treasures. The shop had been there for decades, run by an elderly man named Mr. Harold. The locals rarely visited, claiming the place had an eerie presence. Some said they had seen shadows moving inside when the shop was closed, while others swore they heard whispers when passing by at night. But for 12-year-old Ethan, this shop became his workplace. Ethan was a poor boy struggling to help his sick mother and younger sister. His father had left them years ago, forcing Ethan to take up odd jobs to earn a little money. One day, desperate for work, he knocked on Mr. Harold's door. The old man studied Ethan for a moment before finally saying, "You can work here, but there are rules. Never touch the old wooden box in the back room, never stay after closing hours, and most importantly, if you hear whispering, ignore it." Ethan thought the rules were strange, but he was too happy to have a job to question them. Ethan worked in the shop for a few weeks, dusting shelves, organizing old books, and helping customers. At first, everything seemed normal, but soon, he began noticing odd things. Objects moved from their places without explanation. Cold air brushed against him even though the windows were shut. Faint whispers echoed in the aisles even when he was alone. One evening, while sweeping the floor, Ethan heard a soft giggle. It sounded like a child, but when he turned around, there was no one there. His heart pounded, but he convinced himself it was just his imagination, until the wooden box moved. One night, Mr. Harold had left early, trusting Ethan to close the shop. As he was about to leave, the whispering became louder. It wasn't the faint, distant murmurs he had heard before. This time it was clear and urgent. "Help me! Let me out!" The voice was coming from the wooden box. Ethan's curiosity got the best of him. Ignoring Mr. Harold's warning, he slowly walked toward the back room. The box was small, covered in strange carvings, and seemed much older than anything else in the shop. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside was an old porcelain doll, dressed in Victorian clothing. Its eyes were deep black, almost too realistic. But what terrified Ethan the most was the faint smile that spread across its face, as if it had been waiting for him. The whispering stopped. Then the lights went out. The room plunged into darkness. Ethan's breath quickened as he stumbled backward. The shop was silent, too silent. Even the street sounds outside had vanished. Then came the footsteps. Soft, slow clicks echoed through the shop like tiny shoes stepping across the wooden floor. Ethan's heart pounded as he turned toward the sound. The doll was gone. A cold breath tickled his neck. "You set me free," a voice whispered, sending chills down his spine. Ethan turned and saw the doll standing in the doorway, its head tilted slightly, its painted lips curling into a wider grin. Suddenly the shelves began shaking violently, books and objects crashing to the ground. The whispering returned, but now it was deafening. Angry voices overlapping, calling his name. Ethan ran, but no matter how fast he moved, the shop seemed to stretch endlessly, the exit always just out of reach. Then everything stopped. The shop was quiet again. The door was right in front of him. He didn't hesitate. He rushed outside, gasping for air, but when he turned back, the shop was gone. The next morning, Ethan tried to tell the townspeople what had happened, but no one believed him. They said the shop had burned down 30 years ago, taking Mr. Harold with it. Ethan was too shocked to argue. He went back to the spot where the shop once stood. It was just an empty lot, covered in weeds, but then he saw something on the ground, a small wooden box, and inside it, the same porcelain doll. This time, its eyes were looking straight at him. Ethan's fate remains unknown. Some say he left town never to be seen again. Others whisper that on certain nights, you can hear a little boy crying near the empty lot, begging for help. And if you're unlucky enough to find the wooden box, never open it, because the doll is still waiting.